It's mid-July, and I'd like to talk about what I'm focusing on in terms of managing my small deer property. Now, this is specific to small properties. When I say a small property, I'm particularly talking about a property that's 20 acres or less. Mine is a little over 12 acres, and I've managed to hunt it for a lot of years, and I've had a lot of success along with my dad, who's hunted it with me. A lot of good buck harvests. Mid-July focus, the first thing I want to talk about is seed mix. Right now I'm thinking about what I'm putting in. I actually have decided for this year what I'm going to do. Because I'm not planting a large amount of acres, it probably adds up altogether to just under an acre. But the way I do it is I create a food plot trail, and I'll talk about that more in a second. But the seed mix on the micro parcel, that's 20 acres or less. This year, I'm focusing on putting down crimson clover, Balansa clover, winter peas, and I will do that roughly somewhere between the beginning of August and mid-August. You could kind of hone in your area by looking at the time period 4 weeks before your frost date. Around my area, about mid-October is the frost date, so I'd like to have everything in by mid-August and on the ground planted. So crimson clover, Balansa clover, I'm using those clovers because of two reasons. One, they can tolerate more acidic soil, and two, they do well in soil that isn't as nutrient rich, and the crimson clover grows pretty tall and pretty quick. And it's an annual. I don't want to put down a perennial clover. I'm not worried about it coming back or whatnot, because I'm going to plant that over again with the peas. And the third thing I'm putting down are the peas, the winter peas, and they'll last pretty good until it gets cold enough and you get a heavy freeze, and sometimes they can die out. But last year, the peas that I put down this spring, I saw some of them still growing a little bit. And of course, they were eaten off pretty quickly because deer really like the peas because of the sweet taste, and they eat them rather quickly. The fourth thing that I'll put down on top of that, about 2 weeks after the first planting of the clovers and the peas, is the winter rye. Now, I'm not putting down the clover heavy. I'm putting down the peas pretty heavy because I know the deer are going to eat them heavily. But the clover I'm not putting down really heavily. I just want to get something to start it and get it into the soil. The deer will start eating that, and something as a quicker attractant, and then the peas will come up. And of course, they'll probably mow it all down, and I'll have a lot of open ground. And what I do is, about 2 weeks after, say the beginning of September, I'll put down winter rye. Approximately, if I do one layer, about 200 pounds an acre. So you can do the math based on how much acreage you have. If I do 2 layers, I'll do 100 pounds around the beginning of September, and I'll do another 100 pounds about 2 weeks after. And what I'm looking for is to put a nice coating of seed on the ground to fill in the open space, and it'll grow in pretty thick. And I'm not worried about height. I'm worried about having a lot of green on the ground. And the winter rye is very special because it'll grow throughout cooler temperatures, and once it freezes, it'll still stay green. If there's snow, the deer will dig under and eat it. It'll be one of the few green things left in the middle of winter. And of course, spring comes, it'll start to grow back up. Warmer temperatures, and the deer will obviously browse that until there's green on the trees and the leaves sprout out. And then you could typically mow it off or spray it out, or you can just let it grow. But I would advise not to let it grow up into seed, because the stuff can be 5 to 6 feet tall, and it can be rather a chore to get rid of it to plant again, because you've got so much thatch on the ground. My design, number 2, my design and planting. If you look closely here, there's a C shape. That's what my food plot trail looks like. My property's long, it's shaped like a rectangle. So going from west to east to the north, it'll move, and then it'll cut south, and then it'll move and loop back around from the east to the west. I'm trying to create a pattern of movement with these deer, and I've got to put things down that could take heavy browse. I've got my clovers, and I've got my peas. It's probably going to be eaten down to the ground, but I know my winter rye will last, and I'll put down a thick, heavy layer. I'll overseed, overcompensate, put as much seed down as you think, but I'd say at least 200 pounds an acre, maybe 300 pounds an acre. It just depends on how much rain we get and how quickly it grows up. But you want that thick green mat of forage so those deer can move along that route and it could take the heavy browse. What am I planting with? I'm planting with a tiller this year. Last year I did some no-till stuff, and with unpredictable rains, you've got to have, if you're doing no-till, you've got to have rain when you're putting that seed down so it drives it into the soil. We've been having a real dry summer. I'm anticipating, and last year we had a drier fall in the beginning. I'm anticipating the same thing to go into the fall. So what I'm going to try to do is time some stuff up, get some soil exposed with some tilling. I have a nice tiller. And I'm going. Remember, my food plot trowel in some places is only 3 steps wide, a little bit wider in other spots. But I want to create that line of movement so I can use a tiller. I'm able to move through it rather quickly, get that soil exposed, get the clover into the ground or on top of the soil, get the peas, and then I'm going to cultipack it. And then 2 weeks later, roughly around the beginning of September, is when I'll put down the rye right on top of that, and the rye will fit into the little crevices and little cracks and hit the open soil. And it will germinate rather well, and by that time we usually have cooler weather and we get a little bit moisture on the ground, and it'll stay a little bit longer, and that rye will pop up. Okay, I've never had a failure with rye, and I've been doing it for a little while now. The planting time I talked about a little bit already, but we're looking at roughly, for me, no later than mid-August. And remember, the typical rule of thumb is plant sometime 4 weeks before, no later than 4 weeks before your first frost. Around here it's about October 15th, so I want to get stuff down on the ground by August 15th. Or 8 weeks, I'm sorry, 8 weeks before the first frost. So I want to get stuff on the ground by August 15th. So 8 weeks before the frost, your first frost, and you can use that as a rule of thumb. I think I said 4 weeks earlier, but it is 8 weeks before the first frost. All right. As I said, mine's mid-August, or I have 4 weeks here. You want to do 8 weeks before the first frost. 8 weeks. So hopefully this might give you some ideas of how I go about doing things, and may give you ideas of how you may want to go about doing things. I've used the clovers, I've used the peas, the deer are attracted to it. And in the rye, you can't go wrong with the rye. And remember, I'm here in southwestern Pennsylvania. I don't have a lot of experience in the southern hemisphere, so someone may tell you different if you're down south or whatnot, but this stuff could work there too. There's no reason why I can't, but you can get away with some other things because they don't frost out as quick or they don't freeze out as quick. But if you're talking anything in Pennsylvania and north, this will work for you. So hopefully you have a good season, and it rains because we're not getting a lot of rain here and we've been struggling. We need the rain, and hopefully those food plots will work out for you and you'll have success this year and put some bucks on the wall.